Find somewhere comfortable. There is no need to sit up straight. No need to focus. You do not need to remember any of this. Let the words come to you the way a sound comes through an open window on a still night, arriving softly, meaning something, and then passing on. We are going to spend a little time with something very old tonight, something that ended slowly, the way a fire ends, not all at once, but ember by ember, growing quieter through the long hours until the room is simply dark. The Roman Empire, not its battles, not its emperors shouting at one another across marble floors. We are going to settle into something quieter than that. We are going to think about what it feels like when something vast and ancient simply fades. You don't need to concentrate. Just let the words arrive and let them go again. We're in no hurry tonight. There is something interesting in the fact that nobody, at the time, quite knew it was ending. That is perhaps the most quietly remarkable thing about the fall of Rome. Not the battles, not the particular afternoon in 476 when a man named Odoacer told the last Western emperor, a young, somewhat helpless figure named Romulus Augustulus, that he was no longer needed. Not that moment, as significant as historians have made it, but the long, slow drift that preceded it. Decades, generations, a gradual settling, like sediment in still water, until one day the water was simply different from what it had once been, and no one could say exactly when the change had come. The empire at its height was a vast and patient thing. Under the Emperor Trajan, somewhere around the year 100, it stretched from the Atlantic coast of what we now call Portugal, all the way to the borders of Mesopotamia. From the cold northern reaches of Britain to the warm sands of North Africa. Tens of millions of people. Roads connecting everything. Stretching outward like threads from a great slow center. Goods moving. Languages shifting and blending. A kind of order. Imperfect, heavy, sometimes brutal, but order nonetheless. Holding the known world together. And then, slowly, it began to breathe differently. Let that settle. The historians have counted, over the years, more than 200 theories about why Rome fell. 200. Which suggests, in its gentle way, that perhaps the question itself is slightly wrong. Perhaps Rome did not fall so much as transform. Perhaps what we call an ending was simply a very long, very gradual becoming something else. There was climate, for one thing. The centuries around the height of Roman power had been, compared to what followed, warm and well-watered. Agriculture was steady. Harvests came in. Armies could be fed. Taxes could be collected. The machinery of empire could turn. But from around 150 onwards, the climate cooled, slowly and unevenly. Droughts in places that had always been fertile. Harvests that did not arrive. And then, after 450, something historians now call the Late Antique Little Ice Age. A deepening chill across the lands of the Mediterranean world. The kind of change no single person would notice in a lifetime, but which, across generations, quietly altered everything. There were plagues too. The Antonine Plague, drifting through the empire in the 2nd century, carried perhaps by soldiers returning from campaigns in the east. The plague of Cyprian in the 3rd century, disease moving along those same roads that had made Rome prosperous, finding its way through those same ports, across those same seas. The roads that had been Rome's greatest strength became, in this quiet and unhurried way, its vulnerability. You may have drifted. That's fine. We were thinking about endings that do not feel like endings. About the way a great thing diminishes, not in a single moment, but in 1,000 small moments, each one unremarkable on its own. The 3rd century is a time of particular difficulty. Within the space of 50 years, the empire saw dozens of emperors come and go, most of them dying violently, claimed by the very soldiers who had elevated them. The currency weakened. Cities that had once been thriving and busy became quieter. The villas in some regions stood empty. In parts of northern Gaul, historians have found evidence that local use of money simply ceased. Not because anyone decided it would, but because the connections that made money meaningful, the trade routes, the markets, the confidence that tomorrow would resemble today, had grown too thin to hold. And yet, and this is the part worth sitting with for a moment, and yet the empire kept going. It adapted. Emperors arose who were capable and determined. Aurelian reunited a fragmented empire in the 270s. Diocletian reorganized it, reformed the currency, restructured the armies. Constantine brought stability. built a great new city in the east, Constantinople, which would go on surviving, thriving, calling itself Rome in everything but geography for another 1,000 years. The Eastern Empire would not fall until 1453, a millennium after Romulus Augustulus was quietly retired to a villa in southern Italy. So when we say Rome fell, we mean something specific and something partial. We mean the western half. We mean the political structures centered on the old city, on Italy, on the provinces of Gaul and Britannia and Hispania. We mean the slow erosion of central authority in those lands. And even that erosion was gradual, patient, unhurried. There is no rush. By the time Odoacer took power in 476, the Western Emperor had already been for decades a figure of diminishing weight. Real power had shifted to military commanders, many of them of barbarian origin themselves, men who had grown up inside Roman culture, who spoke Latin, who wore Roman dress, who administered Roman law, but who commanded the armies that the empire depended upon to survive. The last emperors signed documents. They presided over ceremonies. The world went on around them. What is quieter still, and perhaps more interesting, is what did not disappear. The Latin language did not disappear. It softened and shifted and became the seeds of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, languages still spoken by hundreds of millions of people today. The legal frameworks Rome had constructed continued to shape the laws of successor kingdoms. The Christian Church, which had grown enormously wealthy and complex within the late empire, carried Roman administrative structures forward into the medieval world, preserving them in monasteries and episcopal offices throughout what earlier historians called the Dark Ages. Though that name has fallen somewhat out of favor now, as it should. The ages were not dark. They were different, still quietly lit by what Rome had been. The Goths who settled in Roman territory did not come to destroy. They came, many of them, because they were fleeing the Huns pressing from the east, themselves possibly displaced by climate shifts further across the Eurasian steppe. A domino arrangement, a chain of slow pressures, each one pushing into the next, across distances so vast that no one living through it could have traced the connections. In 376, a large movement of Gothic people petitioned the Emperor Valens to be allowed to cross the Danube and settle within the empire. They were desperate, and they were many. Valens agreed, and the settlement went badly. Through mismanagement, corruption among local Roman officials who exploited the newcomers. through starvation and resentment, until it ended in the Battle of Adrianople in 378, where Valens himself was killed. It was a significant moment, but even then, the empire continued. Theodosius came after and stabilized things, negotiated, absorbed. The Goths became part of the Roman military fabric, not outside it. Just the sound of the words. It is said that by the 5th century, many of the men commanding Roman armies were themselves of Gothic or Frankish origin. This is not as strange as it might first sound. Rome had always absorbed. It had always incorporated. Emperors had come from Spain, from North Africa, from the Balkans. The empire was not a single ethnicity or a single culture, but a structure, an idea, a set of practices and laws and shared expectations. And that structure could hold people of many origins, as long as it could hold itself. What weakened it, ultimately, was not any single thing. It was accumulation. Climate and disease reducing the population, making taxes harder to collect, making armies harder to fill, civil wars draining resources and depleting the very field armies that might have defended the frontiers, a widening gap between the very wealthy, the senatorial families in Rome who continued to accumulate land and gold and influence while paying less and less into the common treasury, and the great mass of people who worked the fields, who served in the armies, who built the roads. The historian Salvianus, writing in the 5th century, observed that greed had become nearly universal among Romans of his time. He was probably overstating, as moralists do. But the inequality was real, and it was deepening. And still, the word fall feels slightly wrong. It feels too sudden for something so gradual. The historian Henri Pirenne, writing in the early 20th century, argued that classical civilization really did not end with 476 at all. He saw its true close centuries later, when the Arab conquests of the 7th century reshaped the Mediterranean trading world that Rome had built. Even that, of course, was not an ending so much as a transformation into something new. We continue softly. What remains is not absence. The roads Rome built can still be traced across the English countryside, across France and Spain, running straight and patient through landscapes that have changed entirely around them. The Pantheon still stands in Rome, its dome a quiet wonder, nearly 2,000 years old. The legal concept of innocent until proven guilty has Roman roots. So does the word January. So does the word calendar. So does the shape of the letters you are reading in your mind right now. Empires end. But they end, it seems, the way sleep comes. Not all at once, but gradually. One small awareness releasing after another, until you realize at some indistinct point, sleep well.